When you think about like a crisis hitting at work, your mind probably jumps right to that immediate like scramble, those urgent tasks, the sudden pivots.
Yeah.
But what if I told you that the real story of how these events impact us is like way more subtle, something that unfolds in these really unexpected ways over time?
Totally.
That's what we're diving into today.
I'm excited.
We got this really insightful study that looked at how the intensity of like a huge societal shock, and they looked specifically at the COVID-19 pandemic in Denmark.
Okay.
And how that impacted people working in these crucial public sector roles, police hospitals, assisted living facilities.
Frontline folks. Yeah.
And the source that you shared, it's a beast. It's like this super detailed research paper from the International Journal of Public Administration.
It is. It's thorough. And what's so cool about it is how deep they went with the research.
Yeah.
This wasn't just like some quick poll they followed over 900 people.
Wow.
920 individuals across 45 different organizational units.
That's a big sample size.
From way back in 2019 all the way through 2021. So you really get that sense of before, during, and like sort of after.
Yeah.
And they didn't just ask people how they were feeling,
Right.
They combined that with actual data on how intense the crisis really was across the entire country.
So we're not just talking about anecdotes, we're talking about like real numbers.
Hard data.
Okay, so our mission in this deep dive, I guess, is to unpack this research.
Let's do it.
And figure out how those ups and downs, in crisis intensity relate to how leaders acted, how employees were doing, there's drive their satisfaction.
Yeah.
All within that kind of unique world of public service.
Love it. Yeah. And to measure that intensity, they didn't just like pick one thing. They looked at it from a few angles.
Okay.
So first you got the really tangible stuff, like how many people were getting sick, ending up in the hospital, unfortunately, the deaths.
Those cold, hard numbers.
Exactly. But then they also layered on top of that what the government was doing about it.
So like the policy response.
Precisely. How strict were the rules, lockdowns, masks, limits on gatherings?
Yeah.
All of that gives you a sense of that official response.
Right.
How much daily life was disrupted.
And then this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
They also factored in how people felt about all of this.
Yes. The subjective experience.
Because you know how we all collectively go through something?
Yeah.
It can be just as powerful as what's actually happening objectively.
For sure. Our perception shapes our reality in a lot of ways.
So it really hits home that a crisis isn't just a single event, right? It's this like multi-layered thing.
It's a process.
And what makes this study, I think, so valuable is the timeline. As awful as it was, the pandemic gave researchers this almost like
it's true
unprecedented opportunity to see how things shifted over a long period of time with these really clear peaks and troughs of intensity.
You rarely get that kind of natural experiment.
Right.
This ebb and flow that allows us to dig into how these different elements, the reality of the disease, the official response, and how everyone's feeling, all of those might have had different kinds of impacts as time went on.
Okay, so let's jump into what they actually found.
Let's get to the good stuff.
And I think right off the bat, there's something that might surprise you.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
They found that overall, things like employee outcomes, their motivation to serve the public and their job satisfaction were actually higher during those times when the crisis was at its absolute worst.
Really? That seems so counterintuitive.
You'd think it'd be the opposite.
Yeah, you'd think when everything's chaotic and stressful, everyone would be like, ugh, I hate my job.
Right.
But this research is hinting that, at least initially, something else entirely was going on.
Yeah.
It makes you think that maybe in those moments when things are really bad, that sense of purpose in public service work becomes so much more clear.
Yeah.
And so much more powerful.
Like that meaning really shines through. Okay, so to unpack this a little bit, they looked at two distinct phases of the pandemic.
Right, they did. It kind of breaks it down.
So phase one was that initial shock and the first big lockdown from October 2019 to July 2020.
The early days.
And it's important to remember they didn't have as much data on public sentiment during this initial period.
Right, that kind of public perception piece was limited.
And then phase two was the longer haul, August 2020 to July 2021.
Okay.
So this covers those subsequent waves of the virus. And importantly, this is when they have that more comprehensive picture of how the public was feeling.
Gotcha. So we can really compare and contrast those phases.
Right. That two-part structure is key.
For sure.
Because it lets us see if those initial reactions were just like a blip or if they actually held up as the crisis kept going.
Makes sense.
So let's zero in on phase one.
Right.
What was going on with employees during those intense early days?
So their data points to this big jump right around when that first lockdown hit, March 11, 2020. And they saw a noticeable increase across the board, public service motivation, that inner drive to contribute to society, but also user orientation, which is basically how focused employees were on helping the individuals they directly serve, and then overall job satisfaction as well.
So like a trifecta of good stuff.
Exactly. Boost in all the right areas. And they even put numbers to this.
Okay, I love numbers. Let's hear it.
All right. So for instance, user orientation was more than 8 percentage points higher
Wow.
when those strictest restrictions were in place compared to when there were no restrictions at all.
So it was tied to that lockdown.
Yeah. And they also found a pretty strong positive relationship between their disease index. So that's that objective measure of how bad the virus was. And all those positive feelings. You know, the numbers they came up with were around 0.48 for public service motivation, 0.52 for user orientation, and then a really high 0.67 for job satisfaction.
Okay, now I know those numbers probably mean something statistically significant.
Oh, yeah.
But I think for like you, the listener, what does that actually look like?
Right, let's make it real. So in phase one, the highest the disease index reached was 0.29.
Okay.
Now, that doesn't sound like a huge number.
No, not really.
But based on their calculations, going from no disease at all to that peak level, that actually correlated with a 15 percentage point increase in how much employees were focused on helping the people they serve directly.
So that's a tangible shift.
That's a big jump in their mindset.
Yeah, so what was driving that?
Right. So the researchers, they lean on this thing called the job demands resources theory to kind of try to explain this. And the basic idea is if you've got folks who are already driven by that sense of public service, when a crisis hits and their work becomes like incredibly visibly important to helping others, they're actually better equipped to handle the increased stress because they see a reason for what they're doing.
It's like the meaning is amplified.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes sense intuitively, right? Like if your whole thing is helping when help is desperately needed, that just strengthens that drive.
Yeah, like it validates it.
Yeah, totally.
But there was one piece of employee well-being that didn't follow this pattern in phase one.
Right, not everything went up.
So perceived pro-social impact, that feeling that their work was truly making a difference for society and those they served, that didn't show the same bump in those early days.
That's interesting. So the desire to help was heightened. But the actual feeling of making a difference, maybe that took a little longer to develop.
Like a delayed reaction.
Possibly, or maybe it was influenced by things that weren't directly tied to that initial, like, surge of the crisis.
Okay, so that's how employees were feeling. What about how they saw their leaders behaving during this time?
All right, so they looked at leadership too, and they found a really clear trend with something they call employee-perceived visionary transformational leadership.
Okay.
Catchy.
All right.
Basically, this is the type of leadership where leaders set a super clear direction and they really inspire their teams to get on board with that vision. And this was significantly and positively linked to all those measures of crisis intensity. In phase one, the lockdown, the general level of restrictions, the disease index, all of it.
So when things were really bad, employees felt like their leaders were stepping up and providing that sense of, you know, this is where we're going, this is why.
Totally, and the numbers show it. For example, they saw an increase of over 7 percentage points. In perceived visionary leadership after the lockdown was put in place.
So it's like in the face of all this uncertainty, leaders who focused on that bigger picture and really inspired their teams, people noticed.
They really stood out.
And they appreciated it.
For sure.
That kind of aligns with what you'd hope for, right?
Yeah, in a crisis, you want someone who could steer the ship.
Absolutely. So what about the other style of leadership they looked at?
So that was verbal transactional leadership.
Okay.
So this is more about leaders acknowledging and rewarding good performance, you know, with verbal praise.
Okay. So more of that like direct recognition.
Yeah. One-on-one encouragement. And interestingly, in phase one, this style didn't really show a strong connection to any of the crisis indicators.
That's a little bit surprising.
Yeah, you'd think leaders would be, you know, giving out more verbal pats on the back during a tough time.
Yeah.
It could be that in those initial, like, fast-paced stages, the focus was really on establishing that overarching vision.
Yeah.
And that individual feedback maybe just took a backseat for a moment.
Okay, so that paints a picture of phase one, though.
Yeah, those early days.
So what happened as the crisis went on, we move into phase two? Did those trends hold steady?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Because in phase two, those strong positive links between crisis intensity and things like public service motivation and user orientation, they kind of faded away.
So the shine wore off a bit?
You could say that that initial boost in drive seemed to level out.
So like sustained pressure started to get to people.
Potentially even the most purpose-driven people
Yeah.
can hit a wall if those demands and stressors just keep coming without enough support.
Burnout.
Exactly. And these public sector workers, they're under immense pressure for a long time.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a surprising negative relationship emerging in phase two.
Yeah, this one's a head-scratcher.
Okay, lay it on me.
So specifically with user orientation, they found a negative correlation between how intensely the public was feeling the crisis and how motivated employees were to focus on each individual user.
So it's like the more worried the public was, the less employees felt like going the extra mile for each person.
Yeah, basically. And this wasn't just a fluke. It was statistically significant.
Wow. Okay, so what could explain that?
So the study suggests a couple of things.
Okay.
One is just plain burnout. After being at 100 for so long, your reserves just get depleted.
Yeah.
You have less capacity to focus on individual needs.
Makes sense.
But another maybe more difficult explanation is that there might have been this growing realization that in a long-term crisis, that's affecting so many people. Meeting every single individual need perfectly might just not be possible if you want to keep essential services running.
That's a tough trade-off.
It is, but it's maybe a realistic one.
You got to balance that individual care with the big picture.
Absolutely.
But there was some good news in phase two, right?
There is some light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay, tell me about it.
Perceived pro-social impact. That feeling that your work is making a difference.
Yeah.
That actually showed a positive and significant link with the public's perception of the crisis in phase two.
Okay.
So even though employees might have felt less driven to focus on each individual, knowing that the public was worried and aware of the crisis actually made them feel like their work mattered more.
So that big picture impact was still really important.
For sure, even that indirect feedback loop was a powerful motivator.
Interesting. So it's like the drive to help individual users might go down.
Yeah.
But that feeling of contributing to the overall well-being of society, that can still get a boost when you see the public's concern.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about just straight up job satisfaction in phase two?
So job satisfaction was still positively associated with the crisis, but only really for the level of restrictions imposed by the government.
Okay.
And the researchers think that even with all the craziness of the pandemic, the workplace itself might have felt stable. Like a place where you could still have some sense of security, connect with your colleagues, feel a sense of accomplishment.
Yeah.
Especially when life outside of work was so restricted.
Right. So in a way, work became like a refuge.
It's possible a source of normalcy in a really weird time.
Okay, let's circle back to leadership in phase two.
All right, back to the bosses.
Did we see those same patterns as in phase one?
Not totally.
Okay.
So employee perceived visionary transformational leadership that was still positively associated with the level of restrictions and also how intensely the public was feeling the crisis.
Okay.
But the statistical link was a bit weaker this time.
So it's like that focus on a clear vision was still important?
Yeah.
But maybe not as much of a standout factor?
Yeah, possibly. But here's another twist. Employee perceived verbal transactional leadership actually showed a negative relationship with the disease index in phase two.
So wait, when things were objectively worse?
Yeah. When the infections and hospitalizations and deaths were higher, employees said they actually got less verbal appreciation from their leaders.
That's the opposite of what you'd think.
Right. You'd expect more praise and encouragement, not less.
So what's going on there?
The researchers guess that maybe leaders themselves were just so overwhelmed during those periods of high disease intensity that giving that individual feedback was harder even for folks who are still coming into work.
Right. It's like their attention was pulled in a million directions.
Exactly.
Okay, so big picture, those initial boosts in motivation and satisfaction in phase one, they kind of gave way to a more complicated picture in phase two.
Yeah, the longer the crisis went on, the more nuanced those effects became.
And we saw those surprising negative correlations with user orientation and even verbal leadership in those later stages.
It highlights how the impact of a crisis isn't static. It evolves.
So for you, the listener, what's the big takeaway from all of this?
I think it's that a major societal crisis has this really dynamic shifting effect on public sector employees and how they view their leaders. What initially fuels them in that first response phase
Yeah.
might not be what sustains them over the long haul.
And that has implications for leadership.
Huge implications. It shows that leaders need to be really tuned in to these shifts,
Right.
providing a clear vision that seems to always be important. But those more direct approaches like verbal rewards, those might not always be as effective during long-term crises.
So it's about being adaptable.
Exactly, reading the room.
So looking ahead, what's
Yeah.
the big question this leaves us with?
I think the big question is how can organizations learn from this and support their employees' motivation and well-being
Yeah.
over the long term, making sure we can keep providing high-quality public service even when things are tough.
Right, because that's what it's all about in the end.
Exactly. And maybe it's about finding that sweet spot between that inspiring vision and giving people the support they need.
That balance is key.
For sure.
And if you want all the nitty-gritty details,
Yeah.
you can find the original research paper in the International Journal of Public Administration.
Definitely worth a read.
Yeah, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Absolutely my pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
Take care.